Welcome to episode 15 of season 2 of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. We kick off with a discussion of replacement theory and the fact that your subscription to as much might mean you're just a spoiled cunt. Next up, Sayonara, motherfucker. I deleted Facebook. More on the Elon Musk and the Twitter. Just can't go away. That Elon knows how to stay in the news cycle. And finally, episode 6 of the final season of Better Call Saul. A recap. Thank you all as always for listening. Please give the podcast a 5-star review, a thumbs up, a like, whatever the hell they do on the platforms these days. Please distribute it far and wide. I would greatly appreciate it. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. Patronize on Patreon if you like what you hear. Here we go.
Act 1 on replacement theory and being a spoiled cunt.
A little inside baseball, dear listener. I record these podcast segments. I usually sit for 24, 48 hours before I edit them because I want to be able to take a step back and listen to myself as if I was hearing it for the first time. I originally opened this segment of the podcast with, as you know, my admission, my acceptance of the fact that I'm usually the last to know things. I'm not on social media that frequently. I don't watch 24-hour news networks. And I made a very derogatory comment about the guy who shot up that grocery store in Buffalo. I've actually mapped out and not yet put into words a segment about the drugs that we are being prescribed and taking, particularly for social disorders, anxiety, depression, all sorts of the manias, your ADHD, your ADD. We rarely discuss as a society the effects that these drugs are going to have on us long term. We're trusting implicitly, whether or not we say it, we're trusting implicitly that the drug companies have been honest and sincere in their research and that the long-term effects of these drugs is going to be minimal. What we are realizing as a collective body, not only in this country, but in all of the other countries where these drugs are now prominent, they have extreme, severe long-term effects. Every time you hear about a mass shooting, the first thing that should come to your mind is, what drugs was this person on? What were they taking? What had they been prescribed? You go back to the first mass shooting that really weighed on the collective consciousness of this country, the Columbine shooting, and you didn't hear anything about those two kids and the drugs that they were taking for years. And those kids were drugged up. They were being given all sorts of antidepressants and drugs that are affecting the mood of 16, 17-year-olds? These drugs compromise the systems of full-grown adults. There's no telling what kind of effects they have on minors, on teens. Just know, dear listener, this intro is not the original intro. I had to overdub it. I had to check myself. I had to edit myself, knowing you know better. You actually know better to go out and to cast aspersions on this person, not knowing all of the information. The most important piece of information, what drugs had this person been prescribed? You add to that all of the economic hardship that's going on in the United States in particular, supply chain issues, and now inflation. You have a recipe for the emotionally unstable to act out. And no, dear listener, these drugs do not help stabilize the emotionally unstable. They help to destabilize the emotionally unstable. Does this excuse that fucktard's behavior? No, it does not. It doesn't excuse it at all. Although not excusing it, it certainly provides context. And if there's any hope that we're going to be able to prevent these types of actions by these types of people in the future, context is important. Understanding is important. You've heard it before, and I'll say it again. The same type of thinking that causes the problem will not solve the problem. Although it's a staple in history when there are economic hardships, particularly when there's a lot of inflation or there's a recession in an economy, you have a rise of fanatics. There is going to be a rise in racism. There's going to be a rise in extreme political movements. This is not uncommon. Politicians, because they're a hell of a lot more savvy than we give them credit for, will always capitalize on these opportunities to politicize these events and to use them for identity politics. No politician in power wants to address the economic disparities in the country, in the world, and they certainly don't want to address the fact that inflation is the number one concern for most people. Politicians do not want to address the fact that the government, particularly the federal government, completely failed during COVID in its response, particularly in its economic response after requiring a lockdown. As much as inflation is caused by any tariff that's being placed on a Chinese good or any supply chain issue, it's also caused by the fact that companies are using this as an opportunity to jack up prices, just like they did in the 1970s when we had astronomical inflation. Never let a good crisis go to waste. And getting the people off of inflation and the government's responsibility for it and its failure to take any action in response to it, this is a great opportunity. In utilizing said opportunity, I've seen a number of posts, a number of videos, in particular featuring Tucker Carlson and this replacement theory. One of the posts that I saw was some sort of mashup of Tucker Carlson over the course of the last few years, talking about how this influx of illegal immigrants is somehow welcomed by Democrats, as the new influx of illegal immigrants will help create some kind of Democratic supermajority so that Democrats can perpetually stay in power. That all of the Native Americans, and when I say native in the Bill the Butcher sense, the character from Gangs of New York that is played so astutely, so brilliantly by Daniel Day-Lewis, that type of Native American being replaced by these hordes of illegal immigrants. I don't watch Fox News. I don't watch MSNBC. I certainly don't watch Tucker Carlson. I certainly don't watch Rachel Maddow. So I was unaware of the extent to which this has been a mainstay of the Tucker Carlson roulette wheel, if you will. Every so often, that wheel spins around and that same number comes up, and it clearly speaks to the people that watch his show. Now, I've always thought that Tucker Carlson was a pretentious douche at best and a fucktarded cartoon character at worst, ever since he was on that CNN show Crossfire with the other stooge. I can't remember the guy's name. Tucker Carlson, the kindergartner's contrarian. The pretentious, the self-righteous bow tie look. Sell all you want, I'm not buying. It's not saying much, but Tucker Carlson is the number one cable news show host. He does have the highest ratings. So, in some sense, being a pretentious douche or a fucktarded cartoon character, it certainly pays. When you were the number one news actor on the number one news drama program in the number one time slot, that prime time slot, you've done something right. It certainly doesn't mean that you are right. It means that you've done something right. And what you've done right is speak to a certain segment of the population. That population may be older. That population may be white. That population may be middle to upper class. Or as the data is starting to bear out, lower middle class to poor. That population may be only 1 million to 2 million people in this nation now of close to 400 million people. But that's enough, dear listener. That's enough to put you into the number one slot. So beating this replacement theory drum over and over again, it works. If you buy into, in any capacity, this Tucker Carlson replacement theory, I've got to put it right on the table. I've got to keep it 100, as the kids would say. My ego says you are a fucking jackass. My higher self recognizes you are one of the luckiest people that's ever existed over the course of human history. You are, in fact, a spoiled cunt. That's right, a spoiled cunt. We always associate people being spoiled with wealth and privilege. In the 21st century, any one of us can be a spoiled cunt. Any one of us can look at the world, can look at what the universe is providing for us, and create any story that we want in relation to it. When the universe is trying to provide us direction, fuck you. I want it the way that I want it when I want it, and I want it with no consequences. I'm not going to change anything. I'm not going to learn anything. I'm not going to do anything different. I want what I want when I want it, and I want it with no consequences. If I don't get it, I'm going to throw a tantrum on Twitter. I'm going to live in my mom's basement. I'm going to become a recluse. That'll show them. As I have stated numerous times in this podcast, there is no substantial difference between the political parties, Democrats or Republicans. The notion that there is some kind of plot that the Democrats are going to use, focusing on illegal immigrants in order to stay in power, to do what? To destroy the country, is nonsense. The parties do not differ substantially in any major policy respect. The notion that there's a deadlock in Congress is laughable. And you want a testament to as much? Go and look at the fact that they're throwing money at Ukraine as fast as they can. You're not seeing any dissension on the Republican side. You're not seeing any dissension on the Democratic side. And I don't want to hear that there were 12 or 14 people on the Republican side that voted against the Ukraine aid bill, and that makes it some sort of revolution. When a bill can be drafted, proposed, and passed by the House under the circumstances that it was, again, there is no substantial difference between the political parties. It's all identity politics. And this is where someone like Tucker Carlson, this fucktarded cartoon character, he plays so well. He plays right into the identity politics that's being pushed by not only the politicians, but by the media. This is what plays. This is what plays in corporate media. The foundation of this theory, the idea that it's in any way, shape, or form true, it's pure ignorance, and it's ignorance to such a high degree that you can only look at those that would subscribe to it and say, you are lucky to be able to subscribe to such ignorance. It is a condition of a spoiled brat, of a spoiled little cunt. Let's take for a second into account who these throngs are, these masses, these hordes of illegal immigrants. Who are these people? Where are they coming from? Many of them are poor, coming from Central and South America. Most of them really from Central America, because they can walk. They can actually physically walk to this country. Now, it takes a long time, of course, but it's a hell of a lot easier than a boat ride halfway across the world. Who are these people? These are people coming from countries where they are used to having a strong, authoritative, dictatorial, if you will, president or leader. They are from a culture that values tradition and family. And they are also very religious people, many of them affiliated with the Catholic Church. It is the apex of ignorance to look at that crowd of people and to lump them into, as Democrats themselves do, a Democratic voter. They're poor, they're brown, they're going to vote Democrat. It's absolute nonsense. If you had to sum up by way of a picture, a douchey, East Coast bias, sexually repressed, Republican, conservative, completely ignorant of the cultural milieu that is the Latino community, you sum it up with a picture of Tucker Carlson. A great example of why this replacement theory is just identity politics nonsense is the vote in California. I believe it was Proposition 10 on whether or not same-sex couples could get married in the state. And it failed. It failed in the state of California. There was a lot of teeth gnashing by a lot of liberal groups and a lot of blame placed, probably accurately, on the Mormon Church. The Mormon Church spent a considerable amount of money opposing Proposition 10. But when the polls came back and the data was gathered, I believe it was close to 70%. 70%, again, in the state of California, Hispanics voting against Proposition 10. This is a family-oriented, and when I say family-oriented, I mean a traditional Catholic family, a family-oriented culture, family-oriented community, whether or not you're from Mexico or Guatemala, El Salvador. The notion, the assumption that Latino or Hispanic voters are simply going to vote Democrat because they are a minority, which let's even talk about the fact that they're a minority. Are they really a minority? I think 5 years, 10 years, they're actually going to be the majority in this country. But that they're going to vote Democrat simply because they're not Anglo is nonsense. It is ignorant. Replacement theory, as promoted by Tucker Carlson, plays to that ignorance. You have to have a level of ignorance in order to buy into it. It didn't surprise me at all that Trump did so well with Latino communities. Latino communities respond to an authoritarian figure. They respond to someone, even though the claims were hollow, they respond to claims of family values, of strong Christian values, of protection and conservation of the family. Regardless of whether or not those words had any weight given the candidate that was speaking them, the candidate was speaking them. And these things have often been associated more with the Republican Party than they have been with the Democratic Party. Identity Politics 101. So as much as it's frustrating to hear that this replacement theory has been out there on a network as mainstream as Fox News, being promoted by their number one news outlets, again, call it for what it is, news actor on a news drama program, you can see why it at least has that traction, because it's going to play to the ignorant. How ignorant? Ignorant enough to take an automatic weapon and go shoot up a grocery store. That's how ignorant. Ignorance to the degree that you could call the person that ignorant spoiled. Having the privilege to be that ignorant. Having the privilege to say, I will change nothing. I will do nothing different, and I expect all of the universe, my surroundings, the state, the nation, the world, to change in accord with the way I see the world, with my truth, with my story. Just like Trump would have won the election against Joe Biden if he hadn't been so stupid as to discount mail-in ballots. The Republicans very likely would benefit from a number of these immigrant communities coming into this country, whether legally or illegally, given their cultural background. Identity politics actually plays in favor of Republicans in these communities. But because it doesn't play to the base, it doesn't play to those that would actually come back night after night and watch the kindergartner's contrarian go on in a bow tie for an hour and a half, 2 hours. That potential constituency is ignored. This is a great example, dear listener, of the story that we tell ourselves on a daily basis. It's just a story. It's not the truth. We are so fortunate. We are so lucky to live in this country at this time where we can make shit up in order to have problems and then watch as the problems that we've created, whole cloth, out of nothing, then manifest into additional problems throughout society. And then do what? Use those problems that we've basically created through a ripple effect as justification that we were right about the identification of the problem and our proposed solution. Do you see it, dear listener? It's self-perpetuating. We're getting exactly what we want. Sitting here, actually recording this segment of the podcast, perhaps it's been this way for the last 100, 200 years, if not longer. We've run out of problems. We've run out of true problems as human beings. We came through an evolution that had us scrounging for food, scrounging for shelter, scrounging for a mate, and here we are now having all of those things, ample opportunity for all of them. And instead of celebrating, We manufacture new problems because our old problems are now gone. We miss our old problems. That's all a very long-winded way of me saying, if you buy into the replacement theory on the Tucker Carlson show on the Fox News, own it with pride. You're ignorant. And ignorant to a degree that you may just be a spoiled cunt.
Act 2, Sayonara, motherfucker. I deleted Facebook.
I don't like the Facebook. I rarely ever go on it. Only once a week do I post anything on the Facebook, and that's contingent on it being attached to, or I guess connected with, my Instagram account for what? This very podcast. As I described in some detail last season, because I'm a weak man and I'm routinely in my ego, in order to better promote this podcast, I joined Facebook and I created a podcast page and I thought, okay, I'll use this platform to help promote the podcast, distribute it to millions of potential listeners, have some third-party platform give me millions of dollars to do this every day, quit my real job. As with most dreams that are conjured up in connection with social media, it quickly turned into a nightmare. Facebook was just another thing to manage. It was just another icon on the phone that was demanding my attention. Thankfully, someone as technically unsophisticated as I am was able to figure out how, if I posted a video to Instagram, I could also upload it to Facebook without ever having to log on to Facebook. Like many of the problems that exist in our lives, because I was able to then ignore Facebook, then I was just able to let it linger. I didn't have to address it. While in the middle of my work day, in the middle of my work week, on Wednesday, May the 18th, I started to receive a number of strange texts. These are texts through my phone, not through the Facebook Messenger app, not through Instagram. These were texts coming directly to me on my phone. These were people who knew me, had my phone number, began to text me. Who died? Who died? Naturally, I'm having an extremely busy day at work, and I'm thinking to myself, why are people texting me who died? Why am I being asked to solve that riddle? I'm the last guy to know anyway. I'm never on social media. I despise the 24-hour news networks. Why am I the guy being asked who died? One of my friends screenshotted what they had received on Facebook Messenger and sent it to me. It was a bot spam type message through Facebook Messenger saying, look who died, and then it had a link to it. It's a spam bot. It's somehow an infection that got into my messenger, and it began spamming all the people who are on my friends list on Facebook. Taking a break from my job, mind you, I logged on to the Facebook, and I want to make a note that it wasn't easy. I couldn't find my password for Facebook, so that routine, simple authentication process became an adventure in and of itself. After finally logging into the Facebook, I see that I have a number of messages in Facebook Messenger, and I can see this spam bot message that was sent through my account. So I began to text the people that had texted me, this is spam, I didn't send it, or it wasn't from me. I got a number of responses. And this is authentic to the people who were texting me. I actually appreciate the effort that they put in. There was a sympathy to it, a compassion. Well, you're going to have to turn on the two-factor authentication, texter would say, or you're going to have to give the facial ID recognition. You should change your password. You should make sure your phone number is not on the account. The users were providing me advice on the next steps that I needed to take, given the fact that I had this bot account, this spam account, some kind of spam program or algorithm, or I don't even know what the nomenclature is, running through my messenger. Because I am unsophisticated, and I can't stress this enough, dear listener, I am unsophisticated when it comes to the Facebook, I started to go into my messenger and message the people that this spam thing this algorithm, this program had messaged, I was messaging them, this is spam. Don't respond. Don't open the link. Leave me alone. Well, those clever spam creating, algorithm creating, program writing bastards, they had somehow written this thing to where I couldn't reach out and contact the people that had been contacted with that spam link. In other words, I couldn't warn them. I couldn't warn them not to open it, not to click on anything, that it was in fact spam, and that I did not originate it. In addition, I began to work through this two-factor authentication process, changing my password, going through all this rigmarole. There is a third-party mechanism with regard to this two-factor authentication. What I mean by that is you have to have a third-party authenticator on your phone, and then you use a code given to you by the authenticator after Facebook gives you a code, and you feed the number back to Facebook, and then you can get this two-factor authentication. I'm not a strong man. I'm not a smart man. I'm not an independent man. I began undergoing this process, and it just came through me like a bolt of lightning, like food to the starving man, like water to the dehydrated woman. Fuck Facebook. Fuck you, Facebook. Here I am in the middle of my busy workday, and I've got to deal with your bullshit because you can't keep this platform safe, a platform that I detest in the first place. And again, because I'm such a weak man and I'm so in my ego and I wanted to see this podcast become the next big thing, I joined your shitty service in the first place. One thing I will give myself credit for, I see signs. When the universe hits me on the head with the anvil, I see it as a sign. Okay, I get it. Sayonara, Facebook. Burn in hell. Strangely, as hard as it is to get this 100-factor authentication and 12 different passwords and your Face ID in order to just delete your Facebook account, not an exaggeration, 4 clicks. You go and you click on the icon that has your face on it. You go and click on the icon that's your account settings. You click on the icon that says general information, and you click delete. Well, I'm speaking somewhat out of turn. The Facebook does ask you again, do you really want to delete your account? Oh, I couldn't click that icon fast enough. Facebook is like a waking nightmare, and it's just managing the parameters of your trauma. Although slow to react to the impetus of the universe, the easier thing to do is wake up from the nightmare. I'd say RIP, rest in peace, Facebook, but frankly, I don't want them to rest in peace. Better said, sayonara, motherfucker.
Act 3, more with Elon Musk and the Twitter.
In keeping with the schizophrenic pace of the national media, particularly social media, all the Twitterers were in an uproar. All of the talking heads were in an uproar when Elon Musk threatened to renege on his takeover of the Twitter based on the fact that all of the users are a bunch of bots. And Twitter, as we all know, has been lying for years about how many of the users are actual people and how many of those users are bots or some kind of spam program. A few things to comment on, as every reaction has already been expressed. All of the arms being thrown up and the tongues hitting the floor. Most of it histrionics, most of it just for show. First, I'm going to pat myself on the back. If you've been a long-time listener of this show, you know that I have opined, I have speculated that Twitter is probably 2 out of 5, 40% bots, spam, whatever kind of marketing program, marketing algorithm that they can put together in one of these user profiles. There just aren't that many real people that are using the platform. And it's very easy to manipulate the algorithm to get a number of accounts to promote certain types of ideas or certain types of policies or certain types of products or certain types of people. That there are agencies, that there are services that you can hire to actually increase your Twitter presence, to increase your Twitter post recognition, feed, whatever. There are third parties who can get you trending. It certainly isn't because they're clever. They're going to come up with some catchy phrase that's going to burn through the Twitterverse. They know how to manipulate the algorithm by way of bots. They likely have a legion, an army of fake accounts that can all be used in service of promoting one tweet or one account, one idea, one product, one person. This idea isn't new. And for the sake of Twitter, for the sake of its advertisers, but particularly for the sake of its stockholders, Twitter has always lied about the number of bots, the number of spam programs that are actually present on their platform. Elon being in the position that he's in, me sitting here in the position that I am, I feel that Elon knew that this was very likely the case when he put in the bid for Twitter. He knew, and he had actually stated as much, hey, I'm going to clean up the bots. He knew that that platform was basically 20% at a minimum, 40% at a maximum bots. That's literally 1 out of 5 or 2 out of 5 of every one of the tweets that you see being promoted by bots. Which leads me to my second point. Elon Musk, again, he's sitting in the C-suite. I'm sitting here in a single room with an 11-year-old desk on a 6-year-old computer with a half-watered fern. Given our relative position, I do not doubt that Elon Musk knew that there were too many bots on that platform, and like any savvy businessman, he held on to that card, so to speak, to play it at the perfect time. The stock market takes a dump, Twitter's valuation plummets. Here he has the perfect out that Musk can use to say, I don't have to go through with this deal. Twitter's been lying about how many of its users are bots. It's been putting these lies into its actual reports to its stockholders. This is a misrepresentation. It's a breach of the contract, the sales contract that I had with Twitter. I'm not going to have to buy, and not only am I not going to have to buy, I'm not going to have to pay any penalties for not buying because they lied to me. They lied to you, dear stockholder, and they lied to you, dear consumer. That is a great story. All it needs is a ninja, a vampire, or a superhero, and it'll be made into a Hollywood movie. Back down here in reality, though, it's just a tactic to lower the valuation that Elon's going to have to pay, the money that Elon's going to have to spend in order to acquire Twitter. The sale will go through. Elon will probably knock off, 20%, 25% of the money that he's actually going to pay? I mean, he could actually take that 54 down to a 40. And finally, no story about Elon Musk, this week in particular, would be complete without discussing the sexual harassment allegation made against him by a flight attendant on one of his SpaceX flights. I'm not going to recount the salacious details. Those are easily gathered on the internet. One thing I am interested in is the way this story has been framed. Business Insider reports the story, and it is not as if the story is coming from the actual victim. In other words, this story may have been leaked by someone who is either affiliated with the actual victim or someone inside of Tesla, someone inside of SpaceX, someone inside of a law firm that may be opposed to Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter. The incident allegedly took place in 2016. The settlement allegedly was reached in 2018. It seems quite a convenient time for this story to leak. If true, and if a settlement were reached, no doubt that settlement had a confidentiality and a non-disclosure clause. So I am inclined to believe that the woman, the victim, would not compromise the $250,000 that she reached in the settlement by leaking the story or talking to Business Insider right now. I say all that to set this up. I feel bad for this woman. Let's put ourselves in her shoes. Let's say that everything that she alleges is true, and as recompense for what happened to her, she took the settlement and went out, found another job, started her life over again with the $250,000. 4 years later, this story breaks. She had nothing to do with it. She didn't want the story to break. She didn't leak the story. She didn't talk to Business Insider. It was someone else who did so with probably political motivations. Eventually, her name is going to come out. Eventually, she's going to have to tell her story. As much as she's gone through, as much as she's likely dealing with, the humiliation of having to go through this sexual encounter, if you will, with Elon Musk, and then having to defend herself, likely within the human resources corporate paradigm of SpaceX, and then finally receiving the settlement, having time to start her life over, and then now having to address this again. The heat, the intensity of the public spotlight that will shine upon her. Whether or not the allegations are true, I just don't believe that it was this victim, this alleged victim, I should say, that it was this alleged victim that leaked or otherwise told this story to Business Insider. Musk, for his part, denies these allegations vehemently, but one thing could prove or disprove whether or not this woman's allegations are credible, whether or not a settlement agreement was actually reached, whether or not money was actually paid. I've had several debates with close friends about the business, the corporate position that's been taken in this country about paying settlements just to avoid the specter of litigation or all the trouble of having to go to court. And it's absolute nonsense. No one, particularly a corporation, particularly a billionaire, pays a settlement to avoid anything. If the allegations are false, you pay tens of millions of dollars to litigate that matter and destroy the person who came after you. You don't allow the sharks to see blood in the water. If you in turn pay that settlement, if you in turn not only pay a settlement but have a settlement agreement with a confidentiality and non-disclosure clause, you are guilty. So all the speculation out there in the Twitterverse, out there on the internet, it's all a waste of time, it's all a waste of energy. One thing and one thing alone can give to you, dear listener, the true north, the barometer of truth that you're looking for, and that's whether or not there's an actual settlement agreement and whether or not money was actually paid.
Act 4, Episode 6 recap of Better Call Saul.
I am now thoroughly convinced that Kim exists in the universe of Breaking Bad, that she is somehow still involved with Jimmy McGill, and I think the hints now are less than subtle that she is, with Jimmy McGill, this amalgam of both legal minds and pretty unique personalities that we call Saul Goodman. The opening scene where adolescent Kim has been caught stealing the earrings and her mother comes in and puts on a hell of a show, and they walk out and her mother has in fact stolen a necklace she stole to give specifically to Kim. My interpretation was that in the moment, Kim not only felt guilt and shame, but she was also scared. And she was scared that the security guard may report her to the police. She was scared that she was going to have to pay the money for the earrings and that her mom was going to take it out of her allowance. She was afraid of her mom. At that young age, she genuinely felt the fear, and she genuinely felt the remorse, the responsibility, the consequences of her actions. Her mother may not routinely be a parent, but under these circumstances and given the gravity of what happened, her mother stepped up to be a parent. Then the reality sets in. Her mother is just the precursor to her relationship with Jimmy McGill. She had her own Slippin' Jimmy. It just so happened to be her mother. And her mother steals for her out from under the security guard after playing so well the role of the concerned parent, the angry parent. Steals something that Kim very likely didn't want in the first place, almost because she could do it. Simply because her mother could do it, she did it. And she reminds Kim that the lesson is, you got away with it. Cheer up. You got away with it. You can get away with it. There are ways to get out of what you have gotten yourself into. One starts using pretty sophomoric, simplistic methods to get oneself into trouble. But if you are thoughtful, if you are calculating, and you are patient, you can employ methods to get what you want, employing non-traditional means, without having to use money, by simple manipulation. The actress who plays Kim as a child, her posture, her demeanor after she realizes that her mother had just played not only the security guard, but had played her, and that the whole point was, we're going to get away with this. And we're going to get away with this because deep down, inherently, people are nice and people are trusting. And that can be used to our advantage. Look at that actress as she sits in the car next to her mother, wrestling with the reality of that. You can tell in that moment, at least I interpret it as much, in that moment, she is both angry and ashamed of her mother. She's angry at her mother and she's ashamed, but she's also realizing the gravity, the reality. It's true. This can be employed for good or evil. It is the truth. Not to get too into the weeds, not to psychoanalyze too much the script of a fiction show, but it's clear that Gilligan is showing how the pattern in her childhood leads Kim to someone like Jimmy McGill. As abhorrent and off-putting as Jimmy's behavior, when he admits to as much, would appear to a character like Kim, in fact, to her, that's home. That's comfort. That's what she grew up with. And no matter what situation you were in, you can employ these types of methods of manipulation to get yourself what you want or to get yourself out of a predicament, because people are inherently good and trusting. They are inherently pleasers. Fast forward to the scene at the end of the episode where Jimmy recognizes the judge that they have tried to manipulate by way of photographs to be somebody else, sees that the judge has a cast on his arm and wants to call off whatever the scheme is. We are not yet privy to the entire scheme, but wants to call off whatever the scheme is so that they can regroup because it's not going to work under the present circumstances. And Kim says, no, we're going forward. Think back to all of the situations where Jimmy McGill, as Saul Goodman in Breaking Bad, was having second thoughts, has doubts, is equivocal. This plan will no longer work. We need to think of something else. Who's the bedrock? Who's the foundation? In the universe of Breaking Bad, it's often another character. It may be Walter White, it may be Jesse Pinkman. Other people, including Skyler, are the motivating factors to go in the direction that the characters ultimately go. We don't know whether or not there's someone behind Saul Goodman, the Jimmy McGill character, who's also in his ear, this is the way to go. This is what to do. In the moment, Saul Goodman often has a hell of a lot of Jimmy McGill in him. But when he regroups, when Kim has an opportunity for her input, you've got a much more directed, confident, aggressive Saul Goodman. I'm doubling down on the theory, dear listener. I'm doubling down. On a side note, one of the things that I like that's happening in the show is you're seeing some of the ties between the Better Call Saul universe and the Breaking Bad universe, how things came to be very subtly. And one of them is this office with Francesca decorating the Better Call Saul office, the law offices of Saul Goodman, creating an atmosphere, employing some feng shui, and that being metaphorically and literally pissed on by the Saul Goodman clientele. Seeing the transformation of the office from what was a very quiet, a very welcoming environment to what we know it will be with its jewelry store, bank teller style bulletproof glass and bare bones furnishing. I appreciate that they didn't try to introduce that was all some sort of idea, that was an original plan, that there was forethought into what the individual, the unique Saul Goodman client would want to see in a law office. No, it evolved, and it evolved out of necessity. One final thing, and it's actually going to be a criticism. This can't all be flowers, as the kids would say. I am easily put off in my viewership, in my suspension of my disbelief when I'm watching a television show or a movie. I need to be completely immersed in what's happening in order for me to continue to pay attention. Plot holes, I'm out. Poor character development, I laugh. Bad music and bad timing of music in a television show or in a movie can completely put me off as to what's actually happening on the screen. It's why I love so much the shows that I love, because many of them can immerse you in the world, and there are very few things that are going on in the show, in the universe of the show, that are going to dismiss you or dispel the illusion that they've created. This is very rare in art. It's particularly rare in television, and it is like, as George Costanza once said, discovering plutonium by accident in film, in movies. What thing then put me off in the universe of Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad? Mike has the detail on his granddaughter and daughter-in-law's house because the outside chance that Lalo Salamanca is going to show up there is minimal. It's minuscule, but he's not going to take the risk. So he has the detail. You have a scene where he has to, for all intents and purposes, defend his decision to continue to have a detail, even though they're spread thin, watching his granddaughter's house for fear that Lalo Salamanca may strike there. Then Mike goes to what is another stash house or another lookout post, if you will, a rented home right across the street from his granddaughter's house. Granddaughter stargazing, he's on his cell phone watching his granddaughter look at the stars. Note how big that girl is. Note how mature her voice is. Think about the last time you saw Mike in an episode of Breaking Bad where he is babysitting his granddaughter who is at the park swinging on the swing set. The girl in the future is much smaller and much younger swinging on that swing set than the girl standing out in the yard looking through a telescope stargazing with her grandfather. I suspect that it's the same actress that's been in the Better Call Saul universe for the duration of this television show. And because this television show has gone on for, I believe, close to 7 years because they couldn't film during COVID, that girl grew up. So she's older now than Mike's granddaughter would be in the future during Breaking Bad. As you may have concluded, dear listener, yes, it put me off. Yes, I did more than notice. Does that mean I'm going to stop watching the show? Hell no. Does that mean I hope that this is the last interaction that we have? This is the end of the story, so to speak, between Mike, his daughter-in-law, and his granddaughter for the duration of the Better Call Saul universe? God, I hope so. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.